The realization that mental fatigue often stems not from age itself, but from a specific emotional state changes the trajectory of longevity. Many individuals over 70 accept memory lapses and cognitive fog as inevitable consequences of the passage of time. This fatalistic view ignores the profound impact of constant emotional expenditure on the brain's physical structure and energy reserves. By identifying the specific emotional current that drains neural resources, chronic anticipatory anxiety, one can stop the leak and reclaim cognitive vitality. This exploration offers a pathway to stabilize the mind and protect memory through the lens of mindfulness and stress reduction, moving beyond simple relaxation into a rigorous reclaiming of attention. The invisible weight of chronic worry: the brain consumes a disproportionate amount of the body's energy, and nothing depletes this reserve faster than the loop of chronic worry. Jon Kabat-Zinn suggests that the mind frequently engages in a process of catastrophic thinking where it relentlessly rehearses future scenarios that have not happened. For an individual over 70, this habit transforms from a minor nuisance into a metabolic hazard that directly targets the hippocampus, the memory center of the brain. The constant low-grade hum of anxiety acts as a background application on a computer, silently draining battery power until the system struggles to perform basic functions. This emotional state is not always experienced as panic. Often, it disguises itself as necessary planning or responsible concern for the future. The physiological cost, however, remains high regardless of the label the mind attaches to the activity. When a mind fixates on uncertain outcomes, the body responds by releasing a steady stream of cortisol, the primary stress hormone. In short bursts, cortisol mobilizes energy for survival. But when the release becomes chronic, it becomes neurotoxic to specific brain regions. The hippocampus is particularly rich in cortisol receptors, making it uniquely vulnerable to this hormonal flood. Over time, elevated cortisol levels can lead to the atrophy of neuronal connections and even the shrinking of the hippocampus itself. This biological mechanism explains why a person might feel physically exhausted after a day spent doing nothing but sitting in a chair and worrying. The brain has been running a marathon of what-ifs, burning glucose and oxygen that should have been available for memory consolidation and cognitive maintenance. A common scenario illustrates this invisible drain in the daily life of a senior. Consider an individual preparing for a routine medical appointment or a family visit scheduled for the following week. Instead of simply noting the event on a calendar, the mind begins to manufacture a series of potential complications ranging from traffic delays to bad news. This internal narrative runs on a loop, often interrupting sleep and distracting from the present moment. The individual might find themselves standing in the kitchen, forgetting why they entered, not because their memory is failing due to age, but because their attentional resources are completely monopolized by a future that does not exist. The memory of the task was not lost. It was simply never encoded because the mind was elsewhere. The approach of mindfulness-based stress reduction posits that this exhaustion stems from the doing mode of mind, where the individual is constantly trying to fix or adjust reality. In this mode, the gap between how things are and how the mind wants them to be generates friction and stress. For someone navigating the complexities of aging, the list of things that are not quite right can be extensive, providing endless fuel for the anxious mind. The energy required to sustain this resistance is immense and leaves little residue for the vibrant enjoyment of life. It is crucial to recognize that the exhaustion is not a failure of character, but a mechanical consequence of a specific mental habit. This mechanism of depletion operates silently, often flying under the radar of medical diagnosis. A physician might check blood pressure or cholesterol, but miss the internal climate of urgency that drives the patient's physiology. The individual may report feeling scattered or foggy, symptoms often misattributed to early cognitive decline rather than emotional exhaustion. The tragedy lies in the fact that the brain remains capable and plastic, yet it is being suffocated by a blanket of self-generated stress. Breaking this cycle requires a shift in how one relates to the nature of thought itself. It is important to understand that the goal is not to eliminate thinking or planning, as these are functional necessities of independent living. The distinction lies between constructive engagement with a problem and the repetitive, circular churning of worry that solves nothing. Constructive thought has a beginning, a middle, and a resolution, whereas anxiety spirals indefinitely without landing. The brain recognizes the difference, rewarding the former with a sense of completion and punishing the latter with continued stress signaling. Kabat-Zinn emphasizes that the awareness of this difference is the first step toward reclaiming energy. Even well-meaning attempts to stop worrying can backfire if they add another layer of striving and self-judgment to the mix. The individual might become anxious about their anxiety, creating a secondary loop of stress that further depletes the memory centers. True conservation of mental energy comes not from fighting the worry, but from changing the relationship to it. By observing the anxious thought as a mere event in the mind rather than a command to action, the brain is spared the full physiological reaction. This shift from participant to observer creates a buffer zone where memory and clarity can begin to recover. Why is my mind running a race for a prize that does not exist? The exhaustion of constant resistance, the second major component of this emotional drain, is the phenomenon of resistance to the present moment. Kabat-Zinn describes a state of mind that is perpetually arguing with reality, wishing that the current situation were different than it actually is. For those over 70, this resistance often targets the aging process itself, manifesting as a rejection of physical changes or limitations. This internal battle requires a massive expenditure of psychological force. Every moment spent wishing that the knees did not hurt or that the energy levels were like they were at 50 is a moment of energy lost. This is not about resignation, but about the efficiency of acceptance versus the cost of denial. The physiology of resistance creates a state of tension in the body that mirrors the tension in the mind. When an individual mentally pushes away their experience, the sympathetic nervous system remains in a state of low-level activation. Muscles tighten, breathing becomes shallow, and the heart rate variability decreases. This somatic rigidity sends feedback to the brain that the environment is unsafe, which in turn inhibits the higher cognitive functions associated with learning and memory. The brain prioritizes immediate survival over the nuanced task of storing new memories, resulting in the common complaint of not being able to retain new information. The energy that could support neuroplasticity is diverted to maintain the walls of defense against reality. A significant portion of this resistance manifests as ruminating on the past, a specific flavor of anxiety that looks backward rather than forward. The mind may continuously replay old decisions, losses, or better days, creating a dissonance with the current reality. This temporal displacement means the individual is rarely inhabiting the only time where memory actually functions, the present. A person engaged in deep reminiscence or regret is effectively absent from their current environment. If a grandchild tells a story or a partner asks a question during this state, the information fails to land because the receiver is offline. The subsequent inability to recall the conversation is not a memory deficit, but an attention deficit caused by the heavy lifting of resistance. There is a subtle but profound difference between pain and suffering that is central to preserving mental vitality. Pain is the raw sensation or the objective circumstance, such as a diagnosis or a loss. Suffering is the story the mind creates around that pain, the narrative of why me or it shouldn't be this way. Kabat-Zinn notes that while pain is often unavoidable, the suffering is optional and is the primary source of exhaustion. The mind that compounds physical discomfort with emotional resistance carries a double load. Dropping the second load, the resistance, frees up a reservoir of energy that creates an immediate sense of relief and lightness, even if the physical condition remains unchanged. The transition from a mode of resistance to a mode of allowing requires a courageous pause in the habitual momentum of the mind. It is natural for the human system to contract away from discomfort, and identifying this reflex without judgment allows for a softer response. Instead of bracing against the reality of the moment, the individual learns to lean into it. This turning toward the difficulty paradoxically reduces the stress response. When the brain stops fighting the signal, the alarm bells silence, and the cortisol flood recedes. This metabolic savings account grows with every moment of acceptance, compounding into better sleep and sharper focus. Midpoint in this journey of understanding reveals that the antidote to exhaustion is not inactivity, but a different quality of attention. The being mode does not mean sitting in a trance. It means engaging with life without the overlay of judgment and struggle. It is the difference between swimming with the current rather than thrashing against it. For the aging brain, this efficiency is critical. It allows the senior to navigate complex environments and emotional challenges without hitting the wall of fatigue by noon. The mind stops leaking energy into the friction of no and begins to harness the power of yes to whatever is arising. However, the habit of resistance is often deeply ingrained after 7 decades of practice. It shows up in small ways: irritation at the weather, frustration with technology, or impatience with one's own speed of processing. Each of these micro-resistances is a leak in the energy tank. Recognizing them requires a high degree of alertness. The practice involves catching the mind in the act of pushing away and gently guiding it back to a neutral stance. This is not passive submission, but an active alignment with the truth of the moment, which is the most energy-efficient state a human being can occupy. What energy could I reclaim by simply letting this moment be what it is? The practice of befriending the moment, the cultivation of non-judgmental awareness, offers a direct countermeasure to the depletion caused by anxiety and resistance. This approach, central to Kabat-Zinn's perspective, involves training the mind to rest in the present moment with a sense of curiosity rather than critique. For the aging brain, this is akin to a restorative software update. By anchoring attention in the sensory experience of the here and now, the mind is pulled out of the exhausting loops of past and future. The breath often serves as the primary anchor, a rhythmic and constant physiological event that is always available and always in the present. Returning to the breath is not a mystical escape, but a mechanical reset for the nervous system. When the attention is stabilized on the breath or the sensations of the body, the default mode network, the brain circuit responsible for wandering thoughts and self-referential narratives, quiets down. This neural shift is measurable and significant. It gives the overworked planning centers of the brain a chance to rest and regenerate. For a person over 70, spending time in this mode of presence can lead to subjective feelings of clarity and objective improvements in working memory. The brain is no longer multitasking between living the life and narrating the life. It is simply living. This singularity of focus is the hallmark of a youthful mind, achievable at any age through practice. One might argue that focusing on the present ignores the necessary preparation for the future, a concern often voiced by those accustomed to hypervigilance. However, there is a fundamental difference between prudent preparation and anxious rumination. A mindful approach allows for planning to occur within a distinct window of time, with full attention, and then for the mind to let go of the task. It prevents the planning from bleeding into the rest of the day as a background anxiety. The individual learns to pick up the burden when necessary and put it down immediately after, rather than carrying it as a permanent accessory. This distinction preserves the energy required for meaningful interaction and memory formation. The practice extends beyond formal meditation into the mundane activities of daily living. Washing dishes, walking to the mailbox, or listening to music can all become opportunities for energy conservation if approached with presence. Instead of rushing through the activity to get to the next thing, the individual immerses themselves in the sensory details of the current action. This stops the mental projection forward that creates the sensation of rushing and time scarcity. The feeling of running out of time is often a symptom of the mind always being 10 minutes ahead of the body. Synchronizing the two reduces the internal friction that burns through mental glucose. It is worth noting that the goal is not to empty the mind of thoughts, which is a common misconception that leads to frustration. The nature of the mind is to secrete thoughts just as the salivary glands secrete saliva. The practice is to change the relationship to these thoughts so they're seen as transient events like clouds passing in the sky, rather than facts that require immediate engagement. This decentering prevents the emotional cascade that follows a worrying thought. The thought arises, is acknowledged, and passes without triggering the cortisol response. This preservation of emotional equilibrium is the key to maintaining a sharp memory. One observes that the capacity to remain present often fluctuates, and this fluctuation is not a failure, but part of the rhythm of awareness. There will be days when the pull of distraction is stronger, often driven by physical discomfort or external events. The kindness with which one treats these wanderings is itself a mechanism of energy conservation. Harsh self-correction is just another form of stress. Gently escorting the attention back to the breath, as one would guide a child, bypasses the energy drain of self-criticism. This gentleness is a structural component of the practice, not merely an attitude. The cumulative effect of these moments of presence is a brain that is more resilient to the inevitable stressors of aging. The hippocampus is shielded from the corrosive effects of chronic cortisol, and the neural pathways for attention are strengthened. Memory ceases to be a frantic search for missing files and becomes a natural byproduct of having been truly present when the event occurred. If one is fully there when the keys are placed on the table, the memory of that action is robust. If one is mentally in the future, the memory trace is faint or non-existent. Presence is the guardian of memory. Where does my attention go when it is not here? Cultivating a mindful future, the journey toward a revitalized mind over 70 concludes with the understanding that cognitive longevity is deeply intertwined with emotional regulation. The exhaustion that so many attribute to biological decline is frequently the debris of an unchecked doing mode that runs the engine of the mind at maximum revolutions, even when the car is parked. By recognizing that chronic worry and resistance are the primary thieves of memory and energy, the individual gains the power to close the gates. The path suggested by Jon Kabat-Zinn is not one of striving for a new skill, but of falling awake to the resources already present. It is a subtractive process, removing the layers of anxiety and judgment to reveal the clarity that lies beneath. This shift in perspective transforms the landscape of aging from a battleground of preservation to a field of cultivation. The brain, freed from the constant siege of cortisol, discovers new capacities for connection and insight. The energy that was once bound up in the frantic management of the future becomes available for the richness of the immediate experience. This surplus energy fuels better sleep, stronger immune function, and a more robust memory. The fog lifts not because the years have reversed, but because the storm of internal noise has quieted. The individual finds that they can trust their mind again, not because it is perfect, but because it is no longer being sabotaged by fear. Implementing this change does not require a retreat from the world or a radical change in lifestyle. It requires only a series of small, conscious choices made throughout the day. The choice to feel the breath for 3 cycles before answering the phone. The choice to feel the sensation of the feet on the floor while waiting for the kettle to boil. The choice to notice the urge to worry and gently decline the invitation. These micro moments of mindfulness stitch together to form a protective blanket over the nervous system. They serve as the breaks in the clouds that allow the sun to recharge the solar panels of the mind. The fear of memory loss often drives the very anxiety that accelerates it, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. By stepping out of this loop, the senior empowers themselves to age with agency. The narrative changes from "I am losing my mind" to "I am caring for my consciousness." This stance of stewardship is inherently energizing. It places the locus of control back inside the individual, unrelated to genetics or external circumstances. The brain is responsive to how it is treated, and treating it with the kindness of presence is the most potent medicine available. Ultimately, the quality of one's life in the later decades is defined less by the speed of recall and more by the depth of presence. A sharp memory is valuable, but a peaceful mind is invaluable. Paradoxically, prioritizing peace often results in the sharpness one desires. The brain functions best when it is calm, cool, and collected. By relinquishing the heavy burden of the past and the frightening specter of the future, the individual arrives fully in the only time that truly exists. In this arrival, the exhaustion fades, replaced by a durable and quiet vitality that can sustain the mind for all the years to come. What new clarity arises when I stop trying to control the uncontrollable